We're about ready to begin. So we welcome friends and members who are attending in person here in Seoul and those joining us on Zoom. Today is Tuesday, June 25th, 2024. I'm John Dunbar, General Editor of Royal Ajik Society Korea. I express RS Korea's sincere gratitude to the Asia Development Foundation for its continued financial support. And also I'd love to thank our member Lee Jung-uk, who I think I just saw her walk in, from TCS Tour Lab for helping us with the venue for our lectures. You're quarterly reminded that lecture content here does not necessarily reflect the opinions or positions of RAS Korea. Don't worry, we say that to everybody. Let me tell you a little bit about our lecture before we begin. Sticky pages. Come on. There we go. Yeah. Tonight is lecture 1514, and we have a very special guest, Her Excellency Theresa Dizon-De Vega, Ambassador of the Republic of the Philippines to the Republic of Korea. She is, I'm going to do this fast, a career diplomat with over 25 years of experience. She joined the Department of Foreign Affairs after placing first in the Foreign Service Officers Examination in 1994. She has since served in various offices as well as foreign postings in Mexico, Hong Kong, China, the UK, and the US. Before Korea, she was the Philippine ambassador to the Federal Republic of Germany. And I'd also like to add that she received her master's degree in English from Queen's University in Canada in 1991. In July 2021, she came here to begin her ambassadorship. It's about to be 3 years very soon. So today she is the representative of a nation that has 67,000 citizens in this country. And also her country has over 80,000 Koreans in the Philippines, if I got your numbers correctly. This year also marks the 75th anniversary of bilateral relations between the Philippines and Korea, but I'm going to leave the rest of that for you to explain. So let's give her a warm welcome.
Hello. Yeah. Can everyone hear me? Thank you very much. 감사합니다, John, for that introduction and for racing through the introduction. It's a bit awkward for speakers when introductions go too lengthily. So thank you very much for the abbreviated introduction. I just need to make just one minor correction. 30 years of diplomatic work actually with the Philippine Foreign Service. So this is my 30th year. In the career service. Prior to that, I spent a few years in the academe. I was a professor of literature and cultural studies at the State University of the Philippines, the University of the Philippines. And I'm also a lawyer by training and a member of the Philippine Bar. But tonight is not about me. It's actually really about telling you all and sharing with you some of the important milestones, some of the milestones, and also the high points and also the low points of a very interesting, sometimes complex, but largely an issue-free relationship, bilateral relationship between the Philippines and the Republic of Korea. As John mentioned, we are commemorating this year 75 years of diplomatic relations. I'll get into that a little later, but I just wanted to give you an outline of my talk this evening. We'll start with early Philippines-Korea relations, some interesting things that you may not be aware of. And then we'll move on to the UN Temporary Commission on Korea and the road to nationhood of the Republic of Korea, and how the Philippines was part of that of the international engagement in that aspect of Korean history. Of course, the Korean War from 1950 to 1953, where the Philippines was one of 16 troop-sending states during the Korean War. Post-war reconstruction engagement, and on to more robust partnership in the decades following that. And then we'll end with future-proofing the relations and moving towards a strategic partnership. So if I may begin. Okay. Sorry, click where?
Click anywhere.
Not working. Clicker's not. Sorry, just some technical stuff. This one? Let's see. Okay, there we go. Thank you. So just some bits about early Philippines-Korea relations. Like I think personally, I think as a diplomat of over 3 decades, at the heart and at the core of having very robust engagement, very good bilateral relations are really the people-to-people engagements. It's the sort of feeling you develop about another country, about another people, about another culture and society. And in the case of the Philippines, there's actually very little that's documented before the 20th century. Very little that is extant, but perhaps the earliest documentation of any engagement was about 2 centuries ago. In the early 1800s, there have been historic accounts of Filipino seafarers. We are an archipelagic country. We are a maritime and seafaring country. And in the early 1800s, Filipino seafarers were documented to have been shipwrecked off the coast of Jeju Island, in 1801. And a merchant sailor by the name of Munsun-Duk from Uido in South Jola reportedly served as a translator for the lost seafarers. Of course, as a translator, you would have to know both languages. You would have to know, of course, Korean language, and you would have to know the local language or the dialect of these seafarers. And Munsun-Duk reportedly learned a Filipino language, in particular, a language that resembled very much the Ilocano language. In the Philippines, we have over 100 languages spread out across different regions and provinces. And the language that he reportedly or apparently learned was Ilocano, which is in the northern part of the main island of the Philippines called Luzon. Luzon, of course, is where the capital city, Manila, is located. And during his travels in Asia, he reportedly learned a number of languages, traditions, and cuisines throughout the region as a merchant sailor. Of course, today, there are over 60,000 Filipinos, closer to 65 at the moment, and nearly 80,000 Koreans in the Philippines. Now, but when we talk about the close bilateral engagement between the Philippines and Korea, everyone thinks of it as having started during the Korean War. The Korean War has always been the traditional starting point when discussing bilateral relations between our two countries. But actually, it started a bit earlier than that. The UN Temporary Commission on Korea was established on November 4, 1947, through the United Nations Resolution number 1112. And this was, of course, after Korea was liberated from its status as a colony of the Japanese Empire at the end of World War II. And you had the Korean Peninsula divided between the Soviet civil administration in the north and the US military government in the south. And part of the original agreement, part of the original intent was for both countries to eventually withdraw from the peninsula. But there had to be a system in place to ensure that South Korea, North Korea would both be able to function as governments, as independent entities with a bureaucracy, with a civil service, with a functioning parliament or national assembly. And of course, that would only be possible with the holding of free and open elections. And the mandate of the UN Temporary Commission on Korea was to supervise free and open elections, assist in the withdrawal of occupying forces, and guide the new political entity to full independence. So that included establishing the National Assembly and the civil service of Korea. Now, I'm going to just explain very briefly the two photos at the bottom of the slide. The gentleman on the left, stage left, is President Manuel Rojas. Now, he was the president of the Philippines after liberation. So that would be 1946. 1946, after the Second World War, and the Philippines was granted independence from then the United States of America. And the gentleman on the left is President Elpidio Quirino, who played a pivotal role in the decision of the Philippines to enter the Korean War. Now, we'll move on to the Korean War of 1950 to 1953. Formal bilateral relations were established on March 3, 1949, and it's actually when we launched the year-long commemoration of our 75th anniversary. We were the fifth country to recognize the Republic of Korea as an independent sovereign nation, and we were the first among the ASEAN members. And then the Philippines, which is why if you like to look at diplomatic car plates, you will see the Philippine car plate starting with 005, because that's how they do it here in Korea. I think it's the only country I've seen so far that does it in that fashion. You know, they assign the plate numbers according to the date of the recognition of South Korea. The Philippines deployed the Philippine Expeditionary Force to Korea, or the PEFTOC, for the Korean War effort, and it was composed of 7,420 soldiers. Of that number, 116 were unfortunately killed, 299 were wounded, 57 were missing, with 41 repatriated in prisoner of war exchanges. So there's still about 10 or so Filipino soldiers during the Korean War who remain unaccounted for to this day, actually. And some of their relatives, their descendants, are not really sure if they perished in the southern part or the northern part of the country. And on the 19th of September, 1950, the Philippine 10th Battalion Combat Team, BCT, arrived in Korea, and we were the first Asian country actually to send combat troops. Perhaps the most critical battle that the Filipinos were involved in was the Battle of Yultong, where they acted initially as reconnaissance for the UN forces, but also eventually had to be the first line of defense in some instances. What's interesting is that of the 16 countries which sent fighting troops to Korea for the Korean War effort, the Filipinos were given the moniker the Fighting Filipinos, because compared to the soldiers from other countries, by and large, the Filipino troops were the troops with the most actual combat experience, because a lot of them had served, of course, in the Allied forces during the Second World War, and some of them were then immediately sent to battle domestically during the anti-communist, anti-insurgency campaigns domestically in the Philippines. So they were called Fighting Filipinos. So they were they made up in terms of lack of arms, the latest arms, the newest arms, in terms of actual combat experience and savvy and combat instinct. Some of the more prominent figures from the Philippines who took part in the Korean War, one of them was perhaps the most prominent, the late 12th president of the Republic of the Philippines, President Fidel Valdez Ramos, who was a first lieutenant in the Korean War, and he was just fresh off graduating from from West Point in the U.S. He was sent by the Philippines. He spent a few months studying at the Philippine Military Academy, and then he was sent off to West Point as the top student of his class at that time. And he had just graduated from West Point and was immediately sent to Korea to take part in the war. And other figures were Major Maximo Yang, who died in 2023 at the age of 99, actually. Well, President Ramos was 98 when he passed away in 2022. And also Colonel Conrado Yap, and both of them were Taegeuk Medal awardees, while President Ramos received the Order of the Mukongkwa. And you'll see here, actually, that's a photo of the late President Fidel Ramos, who actually made several trips to Korea during his presidency and even after his presidency. And he made it a point to visit a lot of the commemorative sites for the Korean War, particularly after his presidency had ended. And you can actually view his uniform during the Korean War at the Korean War Memorial Museum in Yongsan. It's on display there. It's on permanent display. And I just wanted to share this quote from General Carlos P. Romulo, who was he was given the title of general during the Second World War. And he was also the foreign minister, the foreign secretary of the Philippines at the time. He was the foreign secretary during the Korean War. And he was also the president of the UN General Assembly at the time that the UN resolution on the Korean Peninsula was issued. And he said that the Philippine government, for its part, has given concrete proof of its support of the principle of collective security by sending troops to help the UN forces in Korea. And of course, to this day, because of the participation of the Philippines in the Korean War, there are several commemorative sites, both in the Philippines and in Korea, paying tribute to the Philippine engagement in the Korean War. There is the Peftok Memorial in Manila. There is the Mari Korea Monument in Marikina City, which is part of the greater Metro Manila area. This was the training site for Filipino soldiers before deployment to Korea. And of course, on the Korean side, we have monuments in Koyang and most recently in Yeonggu County, where I actually went last Friday. But I just wanted to share that the Philippines in participation in the Korean War was not actually cut and dried. It wasn't, when the UN issued its resolution, the Philippine government didn't immediately say, yes, we will go. We will help defend freedom and democracy on the Korean Peninsula. We will help defeat the communist advance into South Korea. It wasn't that easy. It wasn't that cut and dried for the Philippine government. There was an initial difference in perspective, and I wanted to share this with you. In a broad sense, the Philippines' participation in the Korean War was really a turning point in its foreign policy during the Cold War. It was a decidedly pro-US, pro-democracy, pro-liberal democracy pivot, and a very anti-communist stance. At that time, when war in the peninsula broke out, the Philippines was battling its own local communist insurgency just after the Second World War. And the communist insurgency was being fought, so to speak, in the trenches in the Philippines, in the mountains, in remote areas. And so it was a very difficult campaign for the Philippine government and for the Philippine army at that time. And initially, President Quirino's response was not to take part in the Korean War. First, he didn't consider the Korean War as an immediate threat to the Philippines. But, several things came into play which actually changed his mind, his perception later on. In fact, on June 29, 1950, when the UN Transmittal Council Resolution number 27 to the member states of the United Nations, the initial response of the Philippines was to say, we support this, but we're not going to send fighting troops. We're not going to send combat troops to Korea. We will send commodities. We will send medicines, even blood. We also sent rice. We sent medical equipment. But we did not send troops immediately. There was a decision not to get involved in that particular fashion. His initial position was that sending troops to the Philippines during the Korean War was an act of war and an act of intervention in the internal affairs of the country. You have to understand that in the late 1940s and early 1950s, there was, aside from the growing division between what we used to call the free world and the Iron Curtain, there was also a steadily growing pacifist movement in the Asia-Pacific region. In particular, India and Indonesia, both important partners also of the Philippines, were pursuing a more pacifist stance and a more hands-off stance. President Quirino was quoted several times in public saying that if, for example, Korea wants to go communist, let it go communist. That's its decision. They know best. They know how to chart their own future, their history. So that was the initial thinking at that time. Of course, that was also bolstered by certain more pragmatic considerations, the lack of resources. During the Korean War, the Philippines itself was going through a very difficult and very challenging post-World War II reconstruction period. If you recall, among the most heavily devastated capitals in the world during World War II, Manila was among the most devastated cities during the Second World War. But then this sort of changed, and it changed very quickly. And the factors which led to the Philippines' ultimate decision to join the war in Korea was its alliance with the US. General Carlos P. Romulo, who held the presidency of the fourth session of the UN General Assembly, and who was concurrently the Foreign Secretary of the Philippines, played a very pivotal role going back and forth. And there was also the war scare and growing public sentiment that the Philippines should take part, should help South Korea, should ally itself with other UN member countries in defending democracy on the peninsula. Again, I quote General Romulo, Korea is next door to us, and the outcome of the struggle there will have an immediate and unavoidable influences for good or evil upon our country. What has happened in Korea can happen here. And he mentioned this during a Philippine Senate Foreign Committee hearing on August 3, 1950. And just going back to the first reason why the Philippines ultimately decided to join the Korean War, there was a lot of very intense lobbying back and forth between Washington, D.C. and Manila, which finally pushed the Philippines to decide to take part in the Korean War. If I may just read a few things, share with you a few things. There's some very interesting things. What the US did, in essence, was to rally its friends in the Philippine legislature, in the Philippine executive branch, to try to convince the president and the cabinet that participating in the war in Korea was really the way to go, that there was no other choice. The Philippine, very famous at that time, a leading member of the Philippine Senate, Senator Camilo Osias, delivered privileged speech after privileged speech, urging the Philippine government to take part in the Korean War. In one of his speeches, he says, "We are drawn into the present conflict for reasons varied and sundry, but the most important is that this has clearly become a struggle between communism and democracy. We are on the side of the democratic forces of the world." And the Philippine ambassador in Washington, D.C. at that time, Ambassador Miguel Elizalde, sent so many cables at that time, so many cables and reports to Manila, conveying messages from Washington, D.C., messages from the White House, messages from Capitol Hill. Elizalde said that the U.S. government was extremely anxious and would welcome any offer of support from the Philippine government, even initially one battalion, totally equipped with whatever equipment we now have here, given to us under the military assistance agreement. He would go on to say that that if you could see your way to go even a little beyond what you consider wise at this time and offer at once even 2,000 men and officers to be ready in the shortest possible time to embark for Korea, it would be more than appreciated in Washington. So there was this intense back and forth between Washington, D.C. And Manila that eventually convinced President Quirino to send fighting troops. And the other reason was the war scare in public sentiment. President Quirino and his cabinet were not prepared for the widespread public sentiment in favor of sending troops from the Philippines to the Korean War. The news of a war in Korea, in Asia, it was barely 5 years after the Second World War, came as a surprise to many Filipinos at that time. They didn't expect another war to be taking place just 5 years after such devastation had overtaken the world during World War II. And it precipitated a war scare among Filipinos and also a lot of anxiety because at that time, the Philippines itself was trying to manage a communist domestic insurgency. And so there was this growing fear that if the Philippines doesn't do anything to help the UN forces in Korea, communism may start to spread in the region. And during that time, anti-communist leagues, citizens' leagues against communism were formed in the Philippines. And the combination of these two, the Philippine alliance with the US, the war scare and public sentiment, and also the multilateral representations of General Romulo, all served to finally convince the Quirino government to send troops to the Philippines. And it happened quite fast. War broke out in June. The UN Council resolution came out a few weeks after. And by September, the first BCT, the 10th BCT from the Philippines already landed in Busan in Korea. But of course, while standing shoulder to shoulder and having shared sacrifice during the war, really cemented the relationship between the Philippines and Korea. There was also a lot of engagement post-Korean War during the post-war reconstruction period. After the Korean War, after the armistice was signed, well, the war isn't over. When the armistice was signed, now diplomatic relations could actually be formally established. So we established relations. First, the Philippines established a legation under Minister Tomas de Castro in 1954. And we later on established an embassy in 1958 or 4 years later under Ambassador Eduardo Quintero, who was the first Philippine ambassador to Korea. Korea established an embassy in the Philippines under Ambassador Kim Yong-ki in 1954. And on the part of the Philippines, there have been 16 Philippine ambassadors, myself included, during 75 years of relations. And we had 2 ministers serving during the 4-year period when it was still a legation. There is documentation available on the post-war reconstruction partnership the most prominent of which were Filipino engineers, architects, urban planners coming to Korea in the late 50s and the 60s to help in building the initial urban environment of cities like Seoul. The old Ministry of Culture office, of course, now the ministry is in Sejong, the new administrative city, but the old Ministry of Culture office in Seoul, and also the well-known Jangchung Gymnasium, which still stands today after more than 60 years, still serving the city of Seoul, were all designed by Filipino architects and engineers. The US Embassy in Gwanghwamun was actually designed by a Filipino architect. Yes, just for your information. And the current US ambassador to Korea, Ambassador Philip Goldberg, who's an old friend of mine when he served in the Philippines as ambassador some years back, I mentioned to him that I told him, Phil, do you know that your building, that your compound was designed by a Filipino architect? And then he said, I didn't know that. That's why it looks so familiar. It looks like their embassy. It looks like their embassy in Manila. I said, it's from the same period. It's from the same school of design. So there you have it. But aside from that, there were a lot of academic exchanges when Korea was building up its human resources during those first decades after the war. The International Rice Research Institute, or IRI, which is located in the Philippines, had a steady stream of Korean agronomists, agriculturalists, rice experts getting training there. And I would like to think that they got good training because Korea now has one of the most advanced technology in terms of developing rice varieties and in terms of increasing rice productivity. Welcomed a lot of Koreans there. The University of the Philippines, the Asian Institute of Management had a lot of Korean students and public servants through several decades. So, there was a lot of engagement during the war reconstruction, post-war reconstruction period. You can see it's actually, this is not the most recent or the best photo of the Jangchung Gymnasium, but it's good to know that after 60 years, it's still serving the city of Seoul. Now it's used mainly for the women's professional volleyball club league, club games. I think the GS25 team uses it as its home court. But so over 7 decades of close partnership, and under the current administration of President Yoon Suk-yeol, there is a renewed emphasis on ASEAN engagement through the Indo-Pacific strategy, including with the Philippines. From our shared sacrifices during the Korean War of the 1950s, we are still major defense partners. Korea is a very active partner in terms of the Philippine Defense Modernization Program. Just about a week ago, a week ago exactly today, I was in Ulsan with the Philippines Minister of Defense and the Chief of Staff of our Armed Forces, launching the latest Philippine Corvette, which was built by Hyundai, HD Hyundai Heavy Industries. Korea is the Philippines' top source market for foreign tourist arrivals, 1.44 million last year in 2023. That translates to 1 out of every 4 international visitor or tourist in the Philippines being Korean. So our Korean friends, you will never feel lost when you land in Korea. In terms of labor migration, as of April 2024, there are close to 67,000 Filipinos in ROK, and about 26 or half, at least 50% of the Philippine community population here are holders of employment-related visas. We continue to have cooperation and engagement across broad areas. And this is, I think, the benefit of having a very, broad and close and long-standing relationship. There are no, really contentious issues in our relationship. It's largely issue-free. So we do have a lot of engagement in terms of political and security cooperation. We have high-level policy consultations and consular consultations, which we convene on a regular basis. The Philippines is a staunch supporter of Korea to this very day in terms of inter-Korean peace efforts. And we continue to join the international call for the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula as a crucial step for security and the continued prosperity of the region. We strongly advocate a diplomatic solution to the North Korean nuclear issue, particularly through multilateral dialogue. We work very closely with Korea in the ASEAN Regional Forum, or ARF, the latest iteration of which will be taking place in a few weeks' time. And it is the only political security platform or mechanism where both Koreas are actually represented and present. Although we have noticed that in the last 4 years or so, the representation from the North Korean side has been progressively going lower and lower in terms of seniority level. Korea is one of the earliest dialogue partners of ASEAN, a very important development and functional cooperation partner of ASEAN. Korea is of course part of the ASEAN +3 dialogue partnership, which includes China and Japan, and of course in the United Nations. And one of the things I'm very proud of that we've been able to do in the last 3 years here in Korea was to establish for the first time a Philippines-Korea Maritime Cooperation Dialogue. We held the first one in 2022 in Busan. Last year, we held the second one in Manila, and then we go back to Korea for the third one this year. And there are already several projects under this cooperation dialogue, ranging from cooperation on search and rescue, on marine environmental pollution and plastics pollution cleanup, and also on fisheries. In terms of the cultural and people-to-people and economic cooperation, we continue to have a lot of academic exchanges, but it's sort of reversed now. And I think it's also reflective of how much Korea has advanced in terms of your economic, your political, your cultural, and academic and educational standing in the region and in the world. Now, I think there is more engagement from the Philippines coming to Korea, and whereas some decades ago, it was the opposite. So I think it's reflective of the development of both our countries. But we're doing our best, actually, to develop core expertise on Philippine studies here in Korea with Koreans. So we actually have a Philippine Studies program in partnership with the Busan University of Foreign Studies. It's been ongoing now for 2 years, and we hope to continue this. We've published Filipino language learning books for Koreans. We've organized and sponsored seminars and academic visit exchanges among professors and students from Busan, from BUSF, and from partner universities in the Philippines. In the University of the Philippines, there is now a Korea Research Center, one of the first in the country. And there is a Korea Studies program, an actual studies program at the Ateneo de Manila University, one of our top universities also. And we continue to have performing artists and collaboration in the arts. And aside from our maritime cooperation dialogue, we have new platforms. We held our first Joint Fisheries Committee meeting in 2021, and now we have a Science and Technology Committee, which we first launched in 2022. And we see a lot of areas where we can have a lot of cooperation here and engagement, particularly during this very critical time where the world is trying to build norms in terms of how technology can work for us without endangering society and ensuring that no one is left behind. It's a period of norms building, and Korea is taking a lead in norms building in terms of artificial intelligence, for example, and the use of artificial intelligence. As of this year, Korea is the Philippines' 5th top trading partner, 5th export destination. We love this number. The 4th largest import source for the Philippines, the 5th again source for foreign direct investments, and of course a major official development official development assistance partner, we have over 60 bilateral agreements at various levels covering different areas of mutual interest. The most recent of which we signed a free trade agreement last year, and it will take effect this year. We also signed new agreements on Veterans Affairs cooperation, a social security agreement, tourism cooperation agreement, agriculture and fisheries cooperation, open governance in public procurement, and also education. We hope to have more university exchanges moving onwards. And we also take active participation in Korea-based film festivals, trying to pursue more collaboration in the creative content industry. And if we take a look at Philippines-Korea relations, it really is a through line. It's actually a very clear through line from the 1940s to 1950s, shared challenges in terms of ensuring that freedom and democracy will continue to flourish and will lead towards more stability and prosperity for the region. We are seeing challenges to this worldview now in the 21st century with all the geopolitical uncertainties that the world is facing, and including the latest developments on the peninsula here, and also developments in our part of the world, particularly in the South China Sea. But there is at the very core, at the very base of our relation, recognition of shared values from the time of the Korean War up to the present. And these are freedom and democracy, respect for human rights, and a rules-based international order. We are moving towards completing, we've actually almost completed a strategic partnership agreement between the Philippines and Korea, which we hope will be finalized and signed before the end of the year, or at least during the commemorative 75th year. We continue to have our ASEAN dialogue partnership. The Philippines and Korea are both members of the RCEP, the IPEF, the ASEAN-Korea Free Trade Agreement, and of course we have our own bilateral free trade agreement now. We continue to be very close partners in defense and security. In fact, for the first time, the Korean Armed Forces took part in military exercises in the Philippines last November 2023. We have shared global and regional challenges, as I mentioned: climate change, migration, food security. As I mentioned, the looming influence and the inescapable influence of AI, for which Korea is leading the way in terms of building the norms for AI. We welcome very much the issuance and the formulation and the issuance of Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy and the Korea-ASEAN Solidarity Initiative. Many of our focus areas, many of our priorities align with the priorities of Korea as a global pivotal state, and we hope to build on these convergences and synergies in the future. And we are, of course, gearing up for more robust trade engagement and looking at other areas of partnership. And of course, the 60 agreements will help very greatly. And so the challenge is to make sure that these agreements are active, that we're able to do them in a programmatic and forward-looking manner. But just to give you an idea, especially our Korean friends in the audience, Korea is actually a very active partner in the infrastructure development of the Philippines at the moment. In about a month's time, we will be opening this beautiful bridge, this beautiful structure called the Pangil Bay Bridge. It is set to be the biggest bridge project in the Philippines in the last 40 years, connecting very important parts of the southern Philippines in Mindanao, and built using Korean design and engineering, and also with financing from the Korea Export-Import Bank. And Korea has a lot of water-related projects in the Philippines, river projects, disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation measures projects in the Philippines. Korea is heavily involved in our container ports development at the moment. and also in maritime safety enhancement. The Manila International Airport, and I want to be very transparent here, not exactly one of the best in the region or the world. And finally, it will finally get a new lease on life this year when the San Miguel Corporation, which most of you probably know for its beer, but it's actually a conglomerate, and it's more than just a beer producer, but it also invests very heavily in infrastructure, in roads and tollways and ports, and now in airports. And their foreign partner is the Incheon International Airport Company. Of course, defense modernization and digitalization. So let me end there, so we have a bit of time to have a conversation about Philippines-Korea relations and anything else related to that. So as we say in the Philippines, maraming salamat. Thank you very much. Kamsahamnida. Yes. Do you want to use the mic or no? No, it's fine. I can hear, but do you want to use a microphone?
Korean War broke out starting today.
Yes, today. Yes.
Which lasted 40 years. June 25, 1950, in July 27,
1953.
So at that time in the period, militaries encompass about 16 countries. Britain, for example,
Yes.
America, USA, UK, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, France, South Africa, and Thank you very much. So then, now at the Korean War, North Korea was rich than South Korea
Yes.
until 16, until 96.
Yes. Yes.
But now the Korea, North Korea, facing economic collapse. As you know, one of the poorest countries in the world. And Korea is the model success story. Yes. From the poorest country in the world into the growing economic power. Its feature 10th largest economy in the world with GDP. So then, what do you think about the meaning of the Korean War and better relationship between Philippines and Korea? Once again, in the Philippines, one of the best tourists in a wonderful country, and Korean people, like this 1.4 million people. But then one of most of the destinations in the country in the world. So once again, how do you think about the Korean Wars, the meaning and the better relationship for
Thank you very much. Well, I always go back when people ask me what I think of the developments here in Korea through the decades since the war, and I'm always taken back to the quote from General Douglas MacArthur, who said after the armistice was signed that it would take 100 years at least for Korea to be able to rise from the devastation of the Korean War, because it was, and I'm not sure students, young people are even aware of the extent of the devastation and what really happened in this country and to the Korean people during the Korean War. It was, in the accounts of many historians, one of the cruelest wars to have taken place in modern history. In terms of the destruction, in terms of the deprivation suffered. And General MacArthur said it would take you 100 years. Of course, you proved him wrong. You did it in half the time, in 5 decades. You became one of the most highly industrialized countries in the world. Right now, you're in the top 10 economies of the world. I would wager that you probably would be able to rank much higher if you could, freely concentrate your resources in terms of development. But of course, given the circumstances in the peninsula, Korea does devote a lot of its resources also to defense, and rightly so. I mean, the context, the times also call for that. But I keep thinking, if there wasn't the security and political issues that your country faces, you would probably even rise even higher. But I think the intense desire of the Korean people and a strategic vision and the leadership to see you through various stages of development have allowed you to accelerate and to build a modern society, to build a strong economy, and very importantly, to become one of the most innovative countries in the world. And I think that's very important. In fact, I said earlier, to be very honest, the tables have turned quite a bit, because I do recall in the 70s, the 60s and the 70s, for example, many Koreans coming to the Philippines. I wasn't alive in the early 60s. I was born in the late 60s, but I would hear stories and I would read about this when I was researching on Korea and Korea-Philippines relations, that the Philippines was seen as a model for industrial growth, for modernization in Asia. In the 60s, we were the second most prosperous country in Asia after Japan. But circumstances of history, certain things happen which did not see us progress as much as we should have. Although we have the basic foundation for that. But see, the closeness of the relationship with Korea has allowed us to have this very robust and engaged relationship where now we are learning from you, and we are also building on very close people-to-people ties because of our shared sacrifices during the war. But certainly there is much to learn from Korea. And I cannot tell you how many delegations I receive and we assist at the embassy every month, all coming to Korea to benchmark, to learn from you. But of course, learning from you and tailoring it to our own needs and making sure that we implement these effectively and in a very impactful manner is something that we have to do on our own. But we do welcome and we are very appreciative of the support we're getting from close partners like Korea in many aspects of our national development. Thank you. Yes, sir.
It seems from your presentation that the last 4 or 5 years, cooperation intensified. Is there any particular benefit from this?
I think it's mainly because I think it's one of the main drivers is really Korea's own change in terms of how it looks at the world. For many years, within the regional, the bilateral, the regional, and the multilateral sphere, Korea was considered to some extent perhaps a 1 or 2 issue country with 1 or 2 major concerns, mainly denuclearization and the security situation on the Korean Peninsula. And aside from that, most of Korea's engagement with other countries was on a functional cooperation level, meaning official development assistance, doing a lot of functional cooperation projects in different countries. But in the last 3 or 4 years, Korea's own estimation of its worth and its impact and its role in the region and in the larger global community has changed. There's been a lot of talk about the global pivotal state. But even before the current Yoon administration, the foreign policy of Korea, you could already see it evolving and changing. A few years before that, there are already focused programs on building more engagement with ASEAN, for example, with India, with Europe, and not just to confine Korea's engagement to the denuclearization issue, or the peace building issue, or inter-Korean relations. So it's become much broader now, and it's moved beyond economic and functional cooperation and cultural and people-to-people exchanges, also into the political and security sphere. If you read the Indo-Pacific strategy and also the ASEAN Korea Solidarity Initiative of Korea, there is a very strong emphasis there on a rules-based international order, and how this can be realized through a more engaged partnership with like-minded partners. Korea's been using those terms more now, and of course, as a global pivotal state, really using Korea's newfound standing as a major economic power, and also as a major soft power in the world, towards having more impact in the political and security field. So I think, and also because we share the same values. We share the same values in terms of respect for human rights, freedom and democracy, a rules-based order. On the economic side, a free and open international trading system. I think this has brought out a lot of the synergies, and we're able to converge the synergies. Hence, we're able to build more platforms. We both, for example, see the importance of norms building in a world where AI, for example, is inescapable and is moving so much faster than countries, can catch up. So there's a lot of synergy and a lot of convergence now, and I think that's a major driver for more active relations between the Philippines and Korea. Of course, there are some specific contexts, issues in Korea. The current demographic crisis, for example, is yet another area where Korea's engagement and partnership with other countries will be more active. It's unavoidable as Korea becomes more multicultural, more diverse, and as it grapples with how to deal with the demographic crisis it's currently facing. Yes.
Levels of faith and security of their safety, their rights. I can only imagine maybe it's difficult topic to talk about, but what is your position?
Well, my position, of course, my position is the position of my government on this issue, and specifically the position of our Department of Migrant Workers. We do have a ministry, a newly established ministry handling these particular issues, and we're very firm on equal treatment, fair treatment, and also the importance of safety nets for migrant workers, for migrant labor. These are very important tenets in terms of labor migration. I must say though that Korea has actually, through its EPS or employment permits system scheme, has actually been cited as being a model for labor migration, for free, open, and regular migration. And we're hoping that this particular system will continue to evolve and will continue to become an even better system. And in terms of the caregivers for the pilot program, we have consistently pushed that the same principles which made the EPS system a model system, recognized by the Global Forum on Migration, by other migration bodies, to have the same effect and the same impact for the caregiving sector, particularly in its early stages. I've always believed that you have to have a very good foundation at the start. It's a pilot program, but you must put all the necessary elements in place to ensure that it goes smoothly, it's run efficiently, and it's done in a manner which respects and recognizes the rights of all the parties involved. In effect, a win-win system for everyone, for all the stakeholders. Yes, John.
First of all, I wanted to mention, before I get to the hard question, that I found your name in tomorrow's Korea Times. You attended.
I didn't know that, John could get a
It's
copy
like
of
every-
tomorrow's
Yeah,
paper.
But you're in like every day. You attended the Culture and Communication Forum. Your name is there.
Oh, CC,
So-
CC, yes.
Now,
Yes.
the top part, you said that the U.S. Embassy had been designed by Filipinos.
Yes,
This must also
Yeah.
mean that they designed the building to its north, which is now the National Museum of Korean
of contemporary history.
I'd really like to know a bit more about that. If you have.
I have to do a bit more research. I myself believe that there's probably some Filipino input into the design of that building, because it really looks like some of the buildings in Manila, that whole slew of buildings in the brutalist style, which if you go to Manila, the brutalist architecture really dominates.
It's often attributed to Kim Soo-Geun, a famous Korean architect, and it kind of doesn't match his style perfectly. So I'd be curious to know more about this for sure.
We'd have to dig a bit more, and then
Please do.
we'll try our best. We'll try our best. Yes.
Thanks very much.
Yes. In terms of AI, we're hoping to have more discussions on this. We did participate in the Summit for Democracy, which was co-chaired by Korea and hosted by Korea in March. We do share some common some common positions and some common views with Korea and other like-minded nations on the use of AI, the benefits of AI, but also the dangers, some of the vulnerabilities. Particularly, I think a lot of countries, a lot of governments are concerned in this super election year across the world. Globally, it's a super election year of how AI could actually be manipulated, be used to subvert democracy, to subvert open and free elections, to subvert the flow of information, filtering down to citizens and to different communities. So we're hoping to build on that, and of course we plan to take an active part in a forthcoming conference on the responsible use of AI in the military realm. There's going to be a re-aim conference hosted again by Korea in the fall here in Seoul in September. So we also hope to take part in that. And I think from there, there will be more developments, more movements in terms of more focused engagement. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Back to the security issues.
Yeah.
President Yoon here has been very involved in closer military relations with Japan and the United States. The triangle that America has long wanted. Australia is highly interested in both.
Yes.
In security and such. Your previous president, Mr. Duterte, was noticeably pushing away the Americans and trying to be closer with China. What is Mr. Marcos' policy about all this?
Well,
East Asian security. It seems like he hasn't been very open and clear about exactly where he's standing.
No, thank you very much. It's a very interesting question and one that I'm often asked, actually. But just a little point about the foreign policy of the former President Rodrigo Duterte. Some will say it's a pushback from the U.S. From the U.S. relations, but actually he considers it as more of a rebalancing. Rebalancing between the U.S. and China and other partners. During his presidency, his dictum was a friend to all, an enemy to none. In order to give the country, to give his government more space, more flexibility to maneuver, strategically. President Marcos, in his most recent political and security themed speech at the Shangri-La Dialogue, he delivered a keynote speech, said that for a country like the Philippines, right smack in the center of a very, very active region in the Indo-Pacific, we do not want to be made to choose between one over the other. We need to chart our own course, but we need to maintain. But we need to. His position is we really need to take into account that we do have long-standing relations with the U.S. The U.S. is a defense partner, is a treaty partner, and China is our neighbor. And geography is immutable. You really can't change it. I mean, China's going to stay where it is. We're going to stay where we are, and we need to get along with China. And we will always have sovereignty issues with China, as we would with other countries in the region who also have their own claims in the South China Sea. But these are things that have to be tackled in a diplomatic manner. The president has always believed that. Of course, there's always a lot of recalibration, but it's never to lose sight of the fact that dialogue and diplomacy is the best approach to addressing these issues. But he did say in Shangri-La, we don't want to be made to choose. We need to maintain relations with both.
Just in the last 2 weeks, the action on Scarborough Shoal
Yes.
is pretty violent. It's not a stable situation.
Yes, but we do believe that diplomacy and we need to talk about it. We need to keep talking about it. That's the only way.
Few Navy ships like that.
Then solution collectively in the framework of ASEAN.
Well, ASEAN has been working on a code of conduct in the South China Sea for some time now. So it's something that the Philippines is also fully committed to as a member of ASEAN and as part of the negotiations. Because we always have to remember we're not the only ones with a stake in this issue. There are other ASEAN countries who have claims along this very strategic stretch of water. There's someone, yes, sir.
I think one of the means of sometimes and when it comes to comparing what you said that one of the reasons why Korea could see what it did was the land reform in that the big land was broken up and sort of independent person to hold his own then the state of the independent leaders. Now, I'm not sure if such is really the relevance has how important today. Maybe it is, maybe it is not. And my understanding of Philippines is that it is still the long tradition of big land ownership is still going on. But today, maybe one's asset doesn't have to be tied to the land. It could be more mobile and so on. So my question being, assuming that land is not, first of all, what I think is whether land reform is still important, and secondly, if it's assuming it's not that important, or if there is any alternative to land reform, what is your what is your assessment of the social mobility
Yes, yes.
And great to sort of advance my life to education and whatnot, and so on, which might reflect the sense of you being a lawyer, the rule of law, as opposed to who you know. A society where what you do is more important, but do better than of society that measure by who you know.
Yes.
So, they are point of view,
No, I see the point. It's a very valid question. Of course, the aim, I think, for any society, for any democracy like the Philippines would be that social mobility would be through meritocracy, through merit, and not who you know, but what you're capable of and your performance. That's easier said than done, of course, in some instances. But that is the ideal, that you are able to have social mobility through merit, through a meritocracy. I have so much to say about agrarian reform. It's a subject that fascinates me, and it's also one of the I think one of the things I appreciate very much in terms of my foreign assignment here in Korea, because you do have a model agrarian reform program. You did parcel out, but you also did a fair amount of consolidation, which is very important, which has contributed to your agriculture sector being productive, being able to produce what is needed for both for domestic consumption and for export consumption. We do have an agrarian reform program in the Philippines. It has not been implemented in a uniform manner through the decades, and I think that's one particular shortcoming. It's still ongoing up to now, but the government is working on improving it and making sure that adjustments are made in the implementation of the program. And one thing that's very key is agrarian reform is not just a matter of parceling out and saying you get 7 hectares, you get this retention limit, the rest go to those who till the land, who actually work on the land. There has to be support because small land holdings, particularly in the Philippines, in a developing country like the Philippines, won't be able to work. They won't be productive if there's not enough support in terms of training for the farmers, training for agricultural workers, in terms of fertilizers, in terms of irrigation, all the basic things and technology and mechanization, all the things that you need to ensure that land holding is productive in terms of agricultural output. And we're actually this might be of interest to you. We're actually learning from Korea, and some of your innovations are being done in some parts of the Philippines now, in terms of agricultural mechanization, in terms of seed development and seedling development to make these holdings more productive, because it's something that was not uniformly implemented in the Philippines, but which you've been able to do to a great extent here in Korea. But there's so much more that I can say about it. It's something that fascinates me, actually, agrarian reform. Because Korea has a very strong agriculture base, and then you built an industrial base on top of that, and then you innovated in terms of energy, and then you're innovating in terms of technology. So you're following a certain pathway which has brought you to this place, and which can bring you even higher.